So, let's get started. This is tier list for, what is it? OB59 now? Jeez. Tier list for OB59. This is for competitive play, obviously, as I say every single time. It bleeds over a lot into casuals and into ranked play, but without the communication and without the game knowledge, I suppose, that a lot of the competitive players have, there are some differences between this tier list and what you'll see in casuals and ranked games. But generally speaking, it's pretty similar. So yeah, let's get started. Good old Andro. The one and only Andro. I was debating putting him under new, but I think I'm just gonna YOLO it. This is not entirely accurate, I would say. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be better or worse, but from what I felt so far, playing with it, playing against it, playing as it, I feel like he's a solid A+. I think previously he was already starting to come back into meta a little bit. He does counter certain higher end picks, though he does also struggle against some of them as well. So I do think he's A+. I think he has potential to be even better, honestly. Like, even when people get used to playing him, when people get used to the recoil, some players are already started getting used to the recoil, but when people really get used to it and have played with it for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month, you know, I think he has a lot of potential. Now, I don't know that this is necessarily going to stay this way. A lot of people have complained about the recoil and the motion sickness they get from it. So potentially we're going to see some changes regarding that, which could also change the damage potential. Hard to say, but for now, I think he's a solid A+ tier. I think you can pick him whenever. You just kind of have to play around him a bit. You don't necessarily want to pick him into, like, if they have like Shaolin, Barrack, Janos, Ruckus, you know, you're probably not going to be looking at the Andro. But generally speaking, you're okay to pick him whenever, even though you might see him a bit later on in the team comps, in the draft for now, because people aren't really too familiar with him yet. But yeah, overall, I'd say solid A+. I think he can be played into pretty much anything. Just a solid damage dealer right now. Or, I guess he's more an actual flanker now than he has been in the past. Ashe, I think, is still S tier. Nothing's really changed with Ashe. She hasn't been nerfed, she hasn't been buffed. The meta hasn't changed around the Ashe. So I think it's super simple to just put her in S tier. She is one of the best tanks in the game, if not the best. So she just has so much control on the map. So I think she's just solid S tier. Barrack, I think, is also S tier. This one is a little bit debatable. I think that Barrack kind of goes up and down from almost from like week to week, almost even day to day. Like sometimes in some teams, Barrack is more favored for. Certain teams definitely like to play him a bit more than others. Some players might prefer the Ashe, some teams might prefer the Ashe, and some teams might prefer the Barrack, you know? Generally speaking, the Ashe does create more pressure, and pressure is important right now, especially as flankers are starting to get back into the meta. But Barrack is also decent against the flankers. He's the anti-tank, or the anti-flank tank right now. So he's definitely not left out, and he is solid S tier. I think he's probably the closest of the two to drop towards A+. But I mean, he's just solid all-around pick right now. Like, he is a go-to tank. So simple as that, really. Bomb King, I think, is A tier. I think Bomb King maybe has some potential to move around a little bit here in coming weeks. I think he's been underperforming, but that doesn't mean necessarily that he's bad. I think players, there have been some like subtle changes here and there where no one's really identified what the issue is, but people haven't really been feeling it. But people are starting to get used to it again, similar to other carries we've seen in the past where they're changed slightly. And I do think that more people are going to start playing him, and he could potentially move up. But for now, he's just like, he's a solid blaster. He will be picked somewhere in the draft, likely. Usually what you'll see is if one team takes Drogos, then the other will either take a Haven damage dealer or a flanker, or in some cases they'll take the Bomb King. Rarely are you going to actually see just the Bomb King picked, and if you are, it's usually because there's already counter picks to the Drogos on the other team. Like, there's already an Andro picked, then maybe you don't want to go into the Drogos and you get the Bomb King instead. Buck. Why is Buck there? The Fuck. What are you doing, Buck? Either way, Buck's kind of meh right now. He's out of meta and he's out of place. But he's also not fantastic right now. The big issue with Buck is just he has what he needs as a flanker with his ultimate, and when he doesn't have his ultimate, he isn't there, you know? It's so easy to deal with a Buck until he has ultimate. That's literally what Buck is. Buck is a really fucking good ultimate. And when he doesn't have his ultimate, he's just I mean, we'll see as Torvald potentially comes into the meta much more now. Then maybe we'll see some more interesting team comps using multiple flankers. And if we do see multiple flankers, then we can start talking Buck a bit more. But I think right now, when we're looking at mostly one flanker or no flanker per team, I think Buck is going to be picked very rarely. He did get a shadow buff. He did get a slight attack speed buff, as far as I know, and I don't think it helps him much. Again, he has a really broken ultimate. He has one shot on pretty much any target, but without the ultimate, he's just not good enough. He's not consistent enough, so I don't see it. I think it's just B tier, a pocket pick if anything. If you're looking for multiple flank comp or something like that, then maybe we can see him, or maybe like with a Torvald pocket pick. Hard to say right now, but I just don't think he's good enough to be anything above B. Cassie, solid A+ tier along with Androxus, I'd say. I put her in S tier previously, but I think A+ is more appropriate. You're going to pick her early on. You're going to see early picks. Unlike the Andro, I think Andro has potential to be much better than the Cassie does, but Cassie's much easier to pick whenever. Usually you want to be looking to pick her into counters, so like you pick her when they have a Shaolin or a Maeve, but she can just be picked whenever and she's okay whenever. She does excel on certain maps like Jaguar or the more long line of sights maps like Frozen Guard she can do very well on, but I don't think you're going to be picking her like super early in the draft or anything. Much more just middle of the draft, solid Haven damage dealer, and that's what she is right now. Drogo's also along in the A+, I think. Drogo's similar to Andro where he's very good. He just can struggle a little bit in the counter pick area. You could argue that he could go higher. You could argue that he could go lower, but I think A+ is pretty well balanced for him in that when he isn't countered and when he isn't dealt with properly, he's just a complete monster. But at the same time, there are counters to him, you know? And a lot of his counters are slowly moving up in the tier list, so it's hard to argue that you can put him any higher than that. It's just you're not able to just freely pick him anymore like you used to be. So wouldn't put him any higher than that. Eevee. There's a reason that Buck's out of place. Eevee is much better than Buck. And the reason that they're on the same tier is because Eevee is still bugged. I don't know how many patches we're going to get where she is still bugged. She still has triple blink. She still has the blink desync. There's just... I can't do anything with Eevee. I mean, it's almost like I need to put Eevee in this bottom tier here, below C, because she may as well just not exist, you know? For as long as Eevee is bugged in the way she is, there's no reason to pick her. You can't pick her. I mean, you can YOLO it and hope to God that you don't get bugged in the middle of the game, but you're gonna get it, you know? You're gonna get desyncs. You're gonna get triple blink. It's just... I don't know, it's what can you do, you know? Like, it's a shame, too, because I think she's a solid all-round pick, honestly. I think there is potential for her. I think, and now as the flankers are getting back into the game, I think Eevee could actually see a lot of play if she wasn't bugged. But for now, I mean, she's B, you know? She's too unreliable. You can't see her as a solid pick, so that's where she's gonna go. Fernando, A tier. Fernando's just a tank, you know? You can pick him. If you want to pick him, you can pick him. That's where he stands right now. He can be picked at any point in the game. He's not really going to excel in most scenarios, and he's not going to do horrible in most scenarios, but he's an option, and you can pick him whenever. Brock, B+. arguably maybe as low as B, but I think B plus is more fair. He's not really a pocket strat. He's more than that, but he's also not much more than that. He can be picked into very specific situations, not necessarily pocket strat situations, but you know, you're gonna see that situation every now and then, every couple of days maybe, where it's like, man, this is the game. This is the time we're gonna pick Rock, you know? You see that they have a Ying Barrack and a Torvald, you know, and that's when you go, damn, this is my moment to shine. And he can do very well in those scenarios. When he does get the situation where you can pick him, he can do very well. So that's what B plus tier is, you know? You're not gonna be seeing them a lot, but when you do see it, it's probably for a good reason, and he will do very well. Grover A tier. This one's rough. Nothing's really changed with Grover. Nothing's really changed with him. Yet, he's falling off a little bit. It's not necessarily because he's any worse than he was. I absolutely wouldn't say he's any worse than he was. It's just slowly but surely these other characters are climbing up in the tiers, you know? And at the end of the day, like, if every other character has been buffed to a point where they're extremely good, and Grover isn't buffed, well, that means that Grover's extremely bad, you know? So, I don't want to say that Grover's any worse than he was, but at the same time, he's not going to be prioritized as much. He's not going to be picked as much, and he's not going to be prioritized as much. You're not going to see the second pick Grover on Frozen Guard, probably. Seems very unlikely to me. So I can't really argue that he should stay in A+. I think he's moving down because others are moving up. Simple as that, really. Inara, similar to the Fernando. They're very different tanks, but they kind of serve the similar purpose in the draft of, we need a tank to fill. We either pick Fernando or Inara, depending on what we need. Fernando's obviously the more versatile, I'm going to push, or I'm going to sit closer to point, or I'm going to try to punish this character specifically, you know? He has a lot more versatility, whereas I say Inara is a better champion than Fernando, but has less versatility in how you want to play it, you know? You have your two options of, you're going to cripple people, or you're going to go Mother's Grace and stand on point. You know, those are kind of your two options there. Whereas Fernando tends to be a much more versatile. But Inara is much better at what she does than Fernando is. Fernando just has the versatility to kind of support that. So they're both A, but in very different ways. They're just all-around solid picks. You can get them whenever in the draft, and that's fine. Janos. Okay, I've said this for a long time, that supports kind of have their own little tier list right now. It's hard to argue if they're going to be, if they need to be prioritized or not. Generally speaking, you're not going to see that right now. At least in EU, we don't really ban supports, and we don't really pick supports early. They're just kind of there. You get your Snake or you get your Janos. That's kind of how it goes. So I finally done it where I just put them in their own tier list. I put them in their own separate sort of tier list, where they still kind of follow the same descriptions for each tier. You know, like all of my tiers have reasonings behind them, you know. As I just explained, A is like your staple pick. It's just a solid option. B is more of a pocket pick. You're not going to see them very often, but has some sort of potential. And S is you should be first picking or at least second picking these champions. So they kind of follow a similar, at least when it comes to the supports, they follow that similar structure of, if Janos is available, he is an S tier, you should probably pick him, you know? That doesn't necessarily mean you have to pick him early in the draft phase, but when it comes to supports at least, Janos should be your go-to first pick, you know? That's kind of how they're divvied up here. So they're in the tier list, but in their separate little support section, if you will. Kanessa, B+. Kanessa's just like, I don't know, for the last, 3 months just moved between A and B+. I even put her literally between the two for a week or two. Right now, snipers are kind of weak overall. It's very difficult to play as a sniper right now. There's flankers, there's tanks, there's flanker tanks, there's so much shit that you have to be careful of playing a sniper character right now. and it shows in the drafting, at least again in EU, that you're not really seeing the Kanessas, you're not really seeing the Strixes, you're not. I mean, there's just so little room for them right now because of the meta. So when Kanessa is picked, she's going to do well in most cases, unless you pick her into a bad situation. But that's kind of the point of her being B+, right? She doesn't have that many situations. She's just okay or bad in most situations, and then every now and then she has that good pick potential where it's like, I got this. This is the game for Kanessa, you know? So yeah, B+ for Kanessa. She's not great, but when picked, she can do well, similar to the Grok. Lex, hard to say with Lex right now. Honestly speaking, we have seen very little Lex. I'm not sure why we have seen very little Lex. He has some potential. When he first got changed, there were some people experimenting with it, but it's kind of this weird thing where no one was doing bad with the Lex. People were doing alright with the Lex, yet no one really wanted to play him, you know? Like if I were to ask Peridot, it's like, do you want Lex here? He would probably say no, even though it's like, well, why not, you know? Like, give it a go. But it's just, I don't know, people just don't want it for some reason. So it's hard to argue anything more. I think there are situations, very few situations, where he can be very good. Like, for instance, Jaguar Falls. But, I don't know, people just aren't playing him, so what can I say, you know? People aren't playing him, even though I personally think that there's some potential there. Leon, A+ tier. I think it goes along with the Cassie. I think they serve similar roles. Obviously, Cassie's more the flanky type of the two, whereas Leon has more consistent damage and is more of a backliner. They serve the same purpose in the draft, but not in-game. You know, in-game they have their separate roles. Again, Cassie the flanker, Leon the backliner. But in the draft, they filled the same role of, we need a solid Haven damage dealer. You know? And that's kind of where they come in, and that's why they're kind of in the same spot, where you can pick either one. It just comes down to the team comp. Do they have the Drogos? Do they have the Andro? What tanks do they have? You know, those are the situations. Those are the factors that go into deciding if you want the Cassie or Leon. So yeah, I think they're both solid picks, and that's why they get the A+ tier. Maeve. So Maeve's S tier. I said in the last tier list. So last tier list, I don't know where I put her. I think I put her in either B+ or A. I think probably A. Actually, maybe it was B+. Regardless, I put her there and I said, Maeve is probably going to be good. I said, I have no idea right now because I haven't had enough time to experiment with it. I haven't seen it enough. But realistically speaking, now that it's been a week or a week and a half or whatever, she is very good. She's not necessarily a first pick in all situations, and she does have maps where you are going to prioritize her much more and you're going to prioritize her much less, but she is a very good pick right now. The big difference now is that she has the full option to either flank or not flank. You know, a lot of the time we talk about the differences between like Lex and Andrew, right? Andrew's the flanker, or sometimes just a straight up damage dealer, whereas Lex has very much so been the anti-flank in the past. You know, he's very good at dealing with Buck and Eevee and even Andrew. And Maeve has both of those right now. She can deal with tanks very well. She can just kind of shoulder peek and poke and do whatever she wants, and then all of a sudden she pops her ult and she's behind you and fucking you up. You know, and having that option just puts her so high in the tier list because she can completely control the pace of the game, you know? She can absolutely adjust to any situation that your team is in, depending on what team comp they have, depending on if you have comeback mechanic, depending on what cards they have. There's so many different things that go into that, and Maeve can fit into all of them in one way or another, you know? That's the big thing that makes her so good, is that she can just fit into any situation, and that's, yeah, that's what it takes to be S tier right now, and that's why she's there. Mccullough is still broken. He's S+. Please nerf him. Pip. E tier. I think he's just not played, you know? There's no reason to pick the Pip. It's like he has, I always like to say that he has some sort of potential, and he's a jack of all trades, master of none. But realistically speaking, it's just, he's just not good. You know? You can put it however you want, like, Pips has all these different things that he can be good at, and even though he's not excellent at anything, he has some potential here and there. Nah, he's just not good, man. Just not good. As simple as that, really. Ruckus. More tanks to S tier. Yay. Fun times, boys. Fun times. So Ruckus is seeing some play now. The pressure that Ruckus creates. The issue that Ruckus has always had in the past is that he doesn't have his shielding, right? He doesn't have any way to say, alright, stop damaging me, I need a break right now. You know, Fernando can put up a shield, Ashe can dash away and put up her shield, Barrack has a shield and is healing behind his turrets, but Ruckus never really had that. Now the thing with Ruckus is, you can just jump forever. And that hasn't necessarily been lost, you know, or that hasn't necessarily been changed, but people are really starting to realize it, you know? People are really starting to go, okay, I can just stand here. You know, if you're playing on Bright Marsh, right, you go up on the upper little platform on the roof, and you go, I can just stand here. And you really can just stand there. You can do whatever you want with Ruckus. And very similarly to the Maeve, you can control the game however you want. Depending on what your team needs, Ruckus can fit into all of it. Obviously, there are situations where Ruckus can get blown up, and Ruckus can get in awkward spots that other tanks might be able to survive. But that's usually because of the Ruckus making a misplay. In 90% of the scenarios where a Ruckus gets blown the fuck up, it's because the Ruckus player makes a mistake. The reason he was so high before is because he was so good against other tanks. And it's no different now. Like, Ruckus is that good against other tanks. He can blow them up, he can control them, he can juke them, he can out-mobility them effectively. And then he can also do that for carries. He's a very good anti-flank tank. He's a very good mid-range poke tank. And he's just, all around, he is very good. I do think that there are situations where you might not want to be first picking him, certain maps. But generally speaking, just that high ground control and that mobility control that he has brings so much to the table right now that it's very hard to argue that you shouldn't be picking him early. But again, that being said, there are situations where you might say, well, let's grab the Ashe here. You know, playing on Frozen Guard, you maybe want that gap closer with Ashe and that survivability that she brings with her ultimate when you have these long line of sights that Ruckus can't shield or avoid, you know? Then that's the situation where you might say, let's get the Ashe instead of the Ruckus early on at least. But usually that will very shortly be followed up by a Ruckus, you know? So yeah, I think he's just an all-around solid pick right now. Saris, again, if you missed it before, the general idea here is that we have a separate tier list for the supports now that still follows kind of the same structure of the normal tier list. So I'm keeping them in the same one, obviously. And I'm just kind of ranking them based on the same reasoning for the other tiers, just as their own separate little thing. Obviously, Janos is S tier here, but not going to be prioritized over a Ruckus or an Ashe or a Maeve, you know? So, Janos S tier, I'd say Saris is a solid A tier. The thing with Saris is just like, you're not going to pick her, you know? She's not going to be played. But in that situation, that one situation where the enemy team, for whatever reason, decides to ban Janos or Snake, you know, then we can start talking. Then, like, when you have to consider it, then Saris is just an okay pick. And that's what A tier is, you know? It's just an okay pick. So that's what Saris is right now. That being said, again, probably not going to be seen very much, because why the hell would you ban Janos or Snake? Shaolin, S tier. This one's rough. Hard to necessarily argue that Shaolin is as good as these tanks. I think Shaolin still has slightly more potential than the other carries. This is the big thing here, is like, I don't necessarily think that Shaolin is as good as Ashe, as Barrack, as Maeve, as Ruckus. But I do think that Shaolin is better and should be probably prioritized more so than Andro, Cassie, Leon, and Drogos. So he's kind of in between. I'm putting in S tier. I think you're going to see a lot of him. You're going to see him prioritized a fair amount. So I think it's only fair to put him in the S tier. Skye, A tier. Again, similar situation here where you have to argue if she's A or if she's B+. She isn't a pocket pick, but she is a situational pick, and that's usually reserved for B+. But I think she has enough situations to be picked. I think she has enough situations to be picked in that you could put her in A tier, you know? I think there are enough situations that she can be good in to be A tier. I don't think she's any higher than that because I don't think there's nearly enough for that, you know? I wouldn't pick Skye anywhere close to where I would pick Cassie. But I do think there are options for Skye, a decent amount. Not as much as Inara and Fernando, of course, but in the time when Maeve is banned and they pick triple tank, then, you know, then you start going, oh, well, okay, well, Skye might be legit here. Or when they have the Leon and Drogos, and then a Fernando and Ruckus, you know, then you can start talking. Then you go, okay, well, this could be a Skye game, you know? You don't really want the Andro into, let's say, a Shaolin, so maybe you think about the Skye. You know, and I think that's where she fits. I don't think you're going to be seeing her as often as you'll see some of these other A-tier picks, especially the tanks here. But it is what it is. It's my opinion. I think we're going to be seeing more of her. And when she's played, I think she will do just fine. You know, even if you look at PGS, you know, even if you look at the global series that we played just 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I guess. She was picked on Fish Market. Obviously, we ended up losing that game when we did pick it. But the Skye did fine. You know, the Skye did perfectly fine. It was a good pick. It served its purpose. We just fucked the rest of the draft, you know? We didn't play around this guy. It wasn't a pocket pick. And it wasn't the best pick, maybe. But it was a perfectly fine pick. We just fucked the rest of the draft, as I said. So I think she's perfectly fine right now, and I think she deserves the A tier right now. Snake. Still my opinion that Snake and Janos are on the same tier. I think that they are both good healers. I'm not fussed which one I get as a support main. If I'm in the draft, you know, very rarely am I going to say, we definitely need to get the Janos here. You know, I say, just pick the healer. And then they go, okay, well, what healer do you want? I say, I don't know, Janos. You know, generally speaking, I tend to favor Janos because I prefer playing Janos. But there are other teams, there are other players that go, well, give me Snake. You know, they are both very similar. Ranking wise, they obviously have very different play styles, but you know, I think they're both solid picks. I don't think you have to ban either of them. I don't think you have to prioritize any of them, but I also don't think you should ever skip picking one of them. Strix kind of sucks in my opinion. I know he was played in NA and he was played in the PGS, and I still don't think he's good. I see no reason. You know, there's a lot of talk between whether Strix or Kanessa is better. Obviously, there are situations where you might want Strix. Obviously, there are situations that you might want Kanessa. But at the end of the day, Kanessa has a teleport. And at least from my understanding, from my playing it, from my seeing it in competitive play, that teleport's really fucking important. Yeah, you can stealth away, but it's unreliable. And when people are actually like seeing Skye in the meta and people have considered potentially getting Illuminate, there's just nothing a Strix can do. I mean, the snipers in general have a very hard time right now. But at least with Kanessa, you pop your teleport, and there is a small chance that you will get away from that. And with Strix, that's not really a thing. You're not going to get away because you press your stealth, you know? Sure, you can do damage. Sure, you can get a nice stealth shot off because you show up out of the blue with your stealth and get a quick headshot, you know? There's potential there, but he doesn't have an escape. And whether or not it will work in NA, I can't say. In EU, that's unacceptable, you know? You can't have a champion like that. It's already a struggle for certain other champions, but you really, that's not acceptable in a draft for EU at least. There are situations, of course, where you can pick it. It is still in B tier, not C tier. So there are obviously these certain situations where you go, this is my time. This is my time to pick the Strix. But very rarely, I think, are you going to see the Strix picked instead of the Kanessa. Like, they're very similar, just Kanessa has the slight chance of actually getting away with the teleport, and has a way better ultimate. Way better. Having a free one-shot on a damage dealer is mental. So, I don't see it. Maybe as a pocket pick in, like, a Kanessa plus Strix team comp. That's something that we could potentially see. Or if you want a Shaolin Strix, something like that. Maybe as a pocket pick then. But I see it as being very unlikely right now, at least. And again, at least in EU. I can't speak for NA because they have a weird-ass meta. Torvald. Daddy Torvald. A+. I think Torvald sits pretty solid in between the two tank tiers. Most of the tanks are S tier, and the other half is basically A tier. And I think Torvald's the only one that's in between there. I think he's not quite as good, and he won't be as prioritized as Ruckus, Ashe, or Barrack. Obviously, Mccullough needs to be banned every game, so, you know, he's kind of out of the discussion. But I do think that we will see more priority on him than maybe Inara and Fernando. Obviously, some teams are going to defer or try to not play with the Torvald because they can't make it work. It takes a lot of teamwork to properly pull off the Torvald, but I do think that in the near future, we will be seeing more triple tank meta. And Torvald is just so good with that triple tank meta. It's disgusting. And then again, as the flankers are getting better and better, it makes Torvald better and better. I mean, we saw China, right? We saw China DreamHack. They had that strat, and that strat worked damn good. And now that the flankers are getting more into meta, it's more of a default thing to do that. So that alongside the no fall off, which is ridiculous, by the way, high res, just makes him a solid pick, you know? He just makes him a solid pick, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of him. You know, he's essentially a support now, you know? He's a backliner. He's a straight up support. And he's very good at it. Tyra sucks. She still sucks. She brings nothing to the table that another pick can't do. You know? Like, what's the one situation? Tell me the one situation where you want to pick Tyra. Well, okay, I mean, she has her fire, she has her nade, she has a lot of things based on percentage HP, and she struggles against flankers, so okay, let's pick her into tank meta. Oh, well, we're getting triple tank meta, does that make her good? No, because she still sucks. Like, what is she going to do against a Fernando? Like, Fernando's just going to walk up to her and kill her, you know? Torvald outdamages her, Ruckus outdamages her, Barrack and Ashe outdamage her. She has nothing. You know, we just talked about how Strix struggles more so than Kanessa because he doesn't have an escape. Well, you know what's even worse than having a stealth? Having nothing at all, and that's Tyra for you. Victor. Victor is slightly better Tyra. Still bad. But, you know. It's better than Tyra. I know, again, he was played in NA, he was played in the PGS, and he did actually okay, you know? Honestly speaking, he did fine. I think Stolzy played it fairly well on Bright Marsh. But I don't see it. Why would you pick Victor over Cassie, over Leon, over Shaolin? They all have more damage than the Victor. They have more important damage than the Victor, because it's actually relevant damage, you know? The grenade is definitely very good, but all of Victor's damage is just irrelevant damage. It's just, it's so pointless, you know? You just stand there and spam and spam and spam, and it's so hard for your team to actually go in and commit to that. Obviously, there are situations where you can do that, and in a team fight where you can rely on your team to do that, whether it's with flankers or just having enough teamwork to actually follow up on the damage that Victor does, then you can start talking. But that's when we start getting to the point of being a pocket pick, you know? I don't see it. I don't see him being better than any of the other carries. I don't see a reason to pick him. Obviously, again, Eevee's a bit different because she's bugged, and I do think she's much better than Victor, but it's even worse now that the flanks are becoming meta. That's why I think previously I had him in B+ tier, but now with the flanks coming in, like, he can't do anything against an Andrew, he can't do anything against a Maeve, he can't do anything against a Skye. Like, what is he gonna... He can barely do anything against a Drogos, you know? Like, Drogos with Worm Jets and Nimble will absolutely destroy Victor. He's so just irrelevant to the team fight, and that's his biggest issue right now. The one good thing I will say about Victor is that he does have very good potential to reposition and potentially catch people off guard, you know? If he can, I mean, that's what we saw when Stolzy played it on Bright Marsh, where he managed to reposition consistently, and he would get nice little angles and get a grenade or two and spam it down. Usually didn't end up in a kill, but fortunately Danny was playing Maeve and was able to follow up on a lot of that damage, so kind of worked there actually. And that's the one good thing about Victor, is that if you play it correctly, there are situations where you can consistently reposition and get these good angles, but generally speaking, as the flankers are getting better and better, it's just not going to work, you know? It's not going to happen. Like, I would love to see a Victor versus Andrew matchup where Victor wins, because I don't see it happening. Willow, I mean, there's not much reason to pick the Willow right now. There's really just not that much reason. Like, if you want a blaster, you get the Drogos. If someone has the Drogos, or if there's some reason you don't want to pick the Drogos, you get the Bomb King. Like, you don't need a backline blaster. That's the last thing you need on your team, you know? Like, if you really want a backline blaster, just get the combustible Drogos. And if you really can't for some reason, you can still get Bomb King and you will still out damage the Willow, you know? Willow's just, she has no ability to get aggressive. That's the big issue with Willow, is that she is a backliner and she is only a backliner. She very rarely has that potential to actually chase kills and whatnot. The only time she can do that is in her ultimate, which in casual and ranked games works very well. You know? It works fantastic. But once you start talking any amount of communication, or just players that have a general idea of what's going to go down, you know? If I go into a game and I'm playing Andrew and I hear the Willow ult, well, my first instinct is I'm just going to wait for like 2 seconds. He's going to try to build up speed. He's going to come around the corner and suddenly there's a dead Willow, you know? So I think it's very hard to argue that Willow's any good. Once again, in this more slowly but surely flank-oriented meta, whether it's flanks with tanks or flanks with actual flankers, it's very hard for Willow to get anything done. She can't deal with the flankers well enough to justify having her as a backliner, compared to, say, Cassie, Drogos, and Leon, who actually can deal with the tanks and other flankers as backliners, so no reason to pick her right now. Ying, this one's kind of tough for me. Ying and Saris are extremely different types of healers. If you have a Saris, you're gonna struggle at keeping everyone topped off. If you have the Ying, you're gonna struggle to keep any specific individual alive through a lot of DPS. So it's hard to argue which one's better or worse. I think the fairest thing to do is put them both in A tier and say you can pick one of the two. Look at your team comp, look at their team comp, pick one of the two. What do you need right now? Do you need some general healing, or do you need direct healing? And that's what's going to determine which one you pick, you know? Obviously, again, this is a bit different, NA versus EU. I know that NA has experimented much more with the healers in the past. Like, they have played the Pip healer, they played the solo Grover healer, they've played the Ying healer, solo healer. You know, not so much in EU. We don't do that too much. We just stick to our Janus and Snake. But in the rare situation that you might see one of them banned, then again, do you want more direct healing, keep people alive, or do you want general healing, keep everyone like as full HP as possible? That's what's going to make the difference. If anything, I would say maybe Ying has a slight advantage because her ult is actually really solid. Sarah's ult is fantastic, just not easily executable, and very rarely do you actually get any value for it. So yeah, I think they're both A tier. You can pick either of them. It depends entirely on the situation of your draft. Jhin. Finish it off, boys. We finally have symmetry. For once. For once. We nailed it, boys. B+. I think Jhin is in a similar situation to Grover. I think he's not necessarily any worse than he was last patch. In fact, you could argue he's even slightly better. But there's a lot of shit that's a lot better now. And I think because of that, it's important to recognize that and drop the characters that aren't really being pushed as much. You know, the Grover's not being pushed as much as he was in the past, so he's being moved down a little bit. Same thing with Jhin. While he was being played a little bit more and more and more, I think that's kind of stagnated a bit, and while he still might be played, he's also just kind of he's getting power crept by the other champions, I'd say. So rather than A like he was last tier, I think it's fair to put to swap him and Skye basically, and say Skye is the more likely pick, and Jhin is more of a situational pick than Skye is. So yeah, that about does it. We have a beautiful tier list for the first time. We have full symmetry, and overall, I think it is pretty balanced right now. I think there's a very clear gap between the champions you're going to see a lot and the champions you're not going to see a lot. You know, I think once you start going A tier and below, those champions are going to be, generally speaking, more situational picks. On the other hand, I think that the A+S, even maybe some of the A tier picks are going to be picked a lot. You're going to see, I think you're going to be seeing a lot of team comps that have these A+ and higher champions all the time. Like, I think 8 out of 10 of the picks are going to be from the A+ and above in pretty much every single, at least, European game. And then the others will be filled out by, again, pocket picks for B tier, situational picks for B+ tier, and just general need to fill out the team comp picks in A tier.